Good evening. Welcome to the October 2021 general meeting of Ashland CERT on Zoom. I really appreciate all of you being here at this time, and I'm looking forward, including Tim Hegdalt, Ashland firefighter and EMT there, who is going to give our triage review after we do a little bit of other stuff. So in order to have a little content for you at the beginning, I want to talk about two things, which is a comparison of our spontaneous or our participation levels, the 1 through 4 levels of CERT members, versus something that FEMA just came out with, which is a resource typing definition. So to quickly review the guidebook, which you've all seen many times, and I won't beat it to death, hopefully. We have 4 levels of CERT membership based on experience and training and other qualifications. Please excuse my corrections that I've been copy editing this thing, and someday we'll make updates to it. But even if you've done CERT training, if you haven't been around and met level 3 requirements, you're considered level 4 a spontaneous volunteer. And if we have volunteers working with us, we do require that they sign a liability waiver and be 18 and have valid ID. So that's that. And then level 3 is our active members, which I don't think anybody on this call is below level 3. At least I'm not considering you. You know, some of this is open for debate, right? So we haven't had an in-person meeting lately. But level 3 active members pass a background check, do 2 CERT functions a year, are registered for call out, which would be NIXL now, and have completed these 3 online courses as well as basic training. I'll get back to those online courses in a minute. We have level 2, the leadership team, which most of the people who showed up here at 6 o'clock are also on. If you've spent 12 months with CERT coming to the meetings and you attend the 4 leadership meetings and you assist in the basic exercise, which we haven't had, so there wasn't an opportunity to do that, so I don't think that's a disqualifier personally. Completed IS 200, which is a little more information about ICS since that's so important to our operation. I got us put on there that we require a cell phone and demonstrated ability to use 2-way radio. So it's level 2. And level 2 people are considered active participants. They're taking on some responsibility in some way or another, helping out, whether it's taking notes this meeting, thank you, Doug, or doing helping people do Map Your Neighborhood, or helping out, keep the bases up to date and so forth. And these are our leaders, which we all are. Finally, there's level 1 management team, and we add a few requirements to this. It's not brutally difficult to be this. You should have had some advanced training, which we have done from time to time. You should have been on the incident management team of basic training, regularly be at the leadership meetings, and a couple of things that most people haven't done, or lately anyway, which is completed NIXL system training. We used to do NIXL trainings, and we will do again, I believe. And you've got some sort of computer, because we need you to be able to do things with computers, and contribute substantially to planning and execution of advanced training, which kind of, I think that's it's great that we do the trainings and put so much work in them, because it really helps us get that experience of what it is to think about operations and execute them and practice ICS. Any questions or comments about our levels as we know them? You can raise your hand or just blurt out, unmute yourself. Okay. Great. So let's switch over to this other thing, which is the FEMA resource typing. So this came out about a month ago. See if that's showing up. Oh, I see. Is that better? Huh. Interesting. Okay. So FEMA has turned this into a resource. As you know, the ICS term resource refers not only to things, but also to people or groups of people. And it turns out that FEMA can specify what a CERT volunteer is, uh, whether we agree with this or not, or whether there's some flaws in it. But it's an interesting comparison to our levels. So they consider a CERT member to have done basic disaster response skills. They can request a single resource. So the implication there is a CERT member could be dispatched to some management team somewhere, and can be deployed outside the home jurisdiction. Of course, we're volunteers, so they can't make us do anything. But what I thought was interesting is the components of the two. They've defined two levels here, type 1 and type 2, which Dan points out is not congruent with national typing, but it is what they have here. And type 2 is the lower level. So if you look at type 2 first, can you guys read that okay?
Mm-hmm.
A type 2 CERT volunteer is trained according to the authority having jurisdiction, which would be Ashland Fire and Rescue, and performs CERT's primary duties when responding to an incident. So that's what the member is. We don't have education specifications, but they have completed 18 hours of CERT basic training, as well as introduction to incident command, ICS 200, and ICS 700, all of which we require for level 3. So that's equivalent to our level 3. Except they add one that we don't have on our list, which probably should add, which is IS 800 National Response Framework and Introduction. I think that's an interesting thing to be aware of. So that's one of the things we can do while we're waiting for CERT to come up with more things for us to do, more interesting things, is catch up and review these IS courses and pick up on some of the ones we haven't done. There's a raft of IS courses, all free online, that take you to a number of interesting areas regarding emergency response. And I encourage you to check out the catalog at FEMA and see what you'd like to learn about. The fire department, our fire may specify additional required training, and we do to some extent. And so that's type 2, which is sort of our level 3. And then type 1 adds supplemental training. This might be a specialist, someone who can do firefighter rehab or traffic control or crowd management, which is not something we've gotten into, but that's what they have in there. Animal response. I don't believe I'm a qualified animal responder, but I know cats. And then they add a few courses. Basically these two, which I thought would also be interesting for us to add and do, which is the role of voluntary organizations in emergency management and the religious and cultural literacy and competency in disasters. So you can check this out online. Both of them are aimed toward how we respond along with other organizations in our town, right? So there's other volunteer organizations and churches and other groups are here, and it would certainly behoove us to be ready to work with them in the event of a disaster. So they've defined that, and they talk about experience, whether you've completed a task book. So, Terry had us working on task books last year, and she didn't come up with that out of nowhere. It's an official thing that's being widely practiced in emergency management. So task books are something that I think it would bear us looking at as we do our planning and redevelopment of our CERT organization and what we're going to do. The physical fitness requirement CERT that FEMA says is arduous, which is just as bad as it sounds, like going above and beyond normal activity, and it's probably not a good fit for CERT as we understand it, but that's what they put there. And there's a thing about immunizations. This has nothing to do with COVID. In fact, I think there's two. I looked this up, and there was a tetanus And hepatitis A is, I think, what they want. So some basic, and of course, tetanus is a great thing to have. Every 10 years, if you haven't checked lately, make sure you're up on that. Let's see. Do a planned exercise event, blah blah blah, at least once every 2 years. Well, that's pretty low level. So, but that's what they require. And then, oh yeah, and background checks are in their thing too. So we're in alignment more or less with parts of this, but not all of it. And the most thing I see is we could change a little bit about how we do the IS IS web courses, and add a little bit more to that would make us more aware and better prepared responders, I think. And then there's references and stuff. So I attached this to the announcement email if you want to look at it yourself. Anybody have any questions or comments about the FEMA resource typing? Steve, go ahead.
Yeah, I just had a question. I think at one point, after doing the IS courses and getting your certificates, I think Terry had kind of said we should redo those every 5 years. I just wondered if, redo those same courses. I wondered if that was mentioned in the FEMA, guidelines at all.
I only have what we have here is that you've completed them. No, I don't, and it didn't.
So
it didn't say that. It didn't have an expiration for them.
Okay.
I don't know. There might be one somewhere else. Okay. Ariane, hi.
Yes, hi. That was my next question, and I'm because for my previous CERT training in New Jersey, I did the 800, and it was a difficult one, if I may say so. Well, I don't know. I had a hard time with it. That was 6 years ago, so I'm happy to know that I don't need to retake those. But the other question I had is, if we do ourselves the IS 288 and 505, once we've completed it, well, FEMA will know, but how will our group know?
I don't have an answer for that right now.
Okay.
When we get a new staff person in charge of CERT, those will be some of the things we'll figure out, I'm sure.
Okay.
But hang on to your download your certificate and hang on to it for sure.
Oh, sure. Thank you.
Thanks. Dana?
Yes, talk a little bit more about the task book, the position task book. What is that?
So were you around? We did some, we at several meetings, I guess this is 2019. We created these task books, or Terry created them for our specialized just for us, that had places to record your qualifications and which trainings you had taken and when you did them. And the idea was that to maintain a level and show capabilities, you would complete the task book, and someone would. The task book basically is like, I did this, and this supervisor signed off and said, yes, I did this.
I must have missed that meeting.
All right, so there are a bunch of them in the CERT office, and and that's something we could resume doing our own thing, or see what we want to do with that. But it makes sense to keep track of our training and to support that. Yeah, I think.
And another question, if I may. Are we considering aligning with FEMA requirements more and adjusting hours, or?
This is just for our edification. One thing I'm definitely not doing is setting any policies. I'm a volunteer. So, by the way, Chris Chambers will be here later. I believe he's at a volleyball game. Family, daughter, or somebody. Anyway, he's somewhere, and he will be joining us to give us an update on the transition and job stuff. So he'll be available to answer questions. So thanks, Jana. Barb is next.
I'm just wondering if you could sort of explain a little more what these FEMA type things, how are they used, and what I'm not sure if I understand when they would come into play. Like, would we use these to fill out on a form that we are doing something like, when would they be asking what type we are? Like, when would somebody want to know what FEMA type are you?
Well, that's a good question, and you're right. I don't really have an answer. If anyone wants to raise their hand and has some more information or context about resource typing, feel free. Otherwise, I'll just say that, yeah, I thought it was interesting to, one of the things that I've never been able to quite grab is in the whole ICS system and our emergency response framework and NIMS and everything else, they're all designed around professional response teams. And it's always been a challenge to me to say, well, so CERT is a group, but it has its own incident management team with its own leader and its own logistics and blah, 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 blah. And that's not really how ICS is supposed to work. You're supposed to have, one incident management team and then logistics for everybody. Well, we're sort of this quasi separate, but part of the ICS group. So I'm always interested to see when FEMA is clarifying how we fit into the big picture, which I think this is a piece of that. It's like saying, well, what is a CERT volunteer expected to be? So that's a little bit of clarification, but how this would be used is not known to me. I thought it was interesting as a comparison to our roles. That's why I presented it that way. We're over time. Sorry about that. So without further ado, and thanks for the questions, I'm going to turn it over to Tim and ask him to go ahead. I'm going to stop sharing. And Tim, you can go ahead and give us a review of, okay, so first of all, proper introduction. This is Tim Hagdahl. Tim, how long have you been at Ashland CERT? Or
Can you guys hear me okay?
FR?
Can you guys hear me okay?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. I've been with the department for almost 11 years.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
okay.
So, right. And yeah,
I can just introduce myself briefly for those of you.
Sure, go ahead.
I'm at the rank of firefighter and a paramedic here with the fire department. So I spend a lot of time on the ambulance, which is what I'm on today. I got to do a little bit of disclosure. I am on duty. So there is a possibility that I'll get yanked away, but we'll just keep rolling until that happens. So a little bit of background on me. I know that you guys, as I was approached about this, doing a bit of a triage review as it relates to the CERT triage system, that I'm under the understanding, Paul, everybody who's here has had the initial training on. Is that correct? You guys have all been introduced to the CERT triage. It's not totally unfamiliar to you. Is that correct? Okay. And so tonight's, I was asked to do a little bit of a review on that. And so I have some information that we'll cover regarding the CERT triage system, and then just some, I guess, tidbits of information for you guys to try and, I guess, help facilitate where you guys see your role fitting in on any kind of a mass casualty incident, which is where obviously this system would be used. And then augmenting kind of the systems that we're doing at the fire department to help facilitate, streamlining things. So when I thought about this, in our world, in the recent past, in the past few years, a lot of this has been changed and kind of been an updating thing for us. And particularly as it's been a response to mass shootings has been the big thing. And so, but I think this would be more applicable in your scenario if we're talking about it like a large scale natural disaster type event. And I'm thinking something along the lines of an earthquake where our on-duty personnel and even off-duty personnel, provided they can make it into work, depending on the scope of damage, would be quickly overwhelmed. So, you guys doing some sort of roving patrols through neighborhoods, searching for people, and then you're confronted with some sort of secondary incident, like a building collapse or something like that, where now you guys are kind of the ones handling that triage component. So Without further ado on that, we'll talk a little bit more here about that in a second, but I'd like to dive in with you guys. I'll be following down, we'll kind of reference your, what we'll call the flow sheet of the START triage system for you, as you initially make access to victims and then try to sort out by priority. And I would say that fundamentally, and this is an attitude I certainly carry, about an MCI or mass casualty incident, which we define as 5 or more people anticipated needing transport from one event, basically. So if we're guesstimating that at least 5 people are going to need transport to the hospital, we will declare an MCI. Now, a lot of times those are ones that are isolated instances that you guys might never get activated for, but just a little bit of an idea of when we try to, we effectively kind of pull that trigger on mobilizing this system. When you guys first make access, the thing I want to say is that what we keep in mind is that we want to try and maximize, we want to do the most good for the most people, if that makes sense. I will tell you that this type of a scenario is going to be chaotic. There's no other way to explain that. Okay, there's going to be a lot going on, and things can quickly feel overwhelming. But if we stick to these basic principles, and we always in the back of our mind are thinking, how can we maximize doing the most good for the most people? Then it helps us kind of stay in our zone and work within our capabilities. So if you guys have those in front of you, I don't know, Paul, I might ask you for some Zoom help, because I've been a part of Zoom meetings, but I haven't really been the presenter, I guess. But I don't know if I could do a split screen and pull up my email, or pull up, we can go through the slideshow as well, that you guys have seen before while I'm talking. So if you know how to do that, I can certainly.
Sure. If you've got the PowerPoint there on your machine?
I do. I actually have my email. I'm just gonna
okay.
open it right up. But
you open it in your email, and then back in here in the Zoom call, hit share screen, and you should have it should show you a picture of the PowerPoint.
Okay, let me see. My apologies, everybody. I'm not finding it.
Do you want me to pull up the triage slides that I've got?
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, we
I
can
can
do
just share those.
So I
Okay.
did review those that you sent me, Paul. We'll pull those up and I'll talk about them, and then we'll also use that flow sheet. So,
all right. Let's see.
Triage, obviously meaning to sort. It's a French term, but so what we're trying to do is sort people based on immediate need and immediate life threats. And when we talk about immediate life threats, we're talking about the 3 big killers of people in a mass casualty incident, which would be their airway, their bleeding, and then management of shock. And shock can be tricky because, especially in a scenario like this, you're going to have citizens that are overwhelmed in a state of what I will call like a shell shock, where they may not be in a medical shock per se, because shock is strictly defined as something that impedes our ability to distribute blood. And it can be a little bit trickier, but we have some tools for that as well to determine whether or not someone's in a state of shock. So airway is the first thing, and that's the first thing that we look at when we're talking about START triage. So as we start into the triage system, we've got the 4 categories that you're probably already familiar with, but green being what we'll call the minor injuries, or so the walking wounded per se, or people who are uninjured. And so when we approach a group, however many it may be, of victims, the easiest thing to do to sort the greens out would be to say, if you can stand and walk here to some, it might be 50 feet off to the side. It might be to a CERT member who kind of would be that designated spot for them to go to. So in that moment, anybody who can get up and walk to that person can do so. And then those patients are green patients, the ones that can ambulate and move. And then from there, the patients that we need to sort out into the other three categories would be something that we do as a direct assessment, individual to individual. As we approach the person, and you can see here, which this arranges it a little bit differently, what you see on the screen, but it's the same concept as what's on that flow sheet that I saw that you guys had in that print-off version. When you approach a victim, first we need to assess whether or not they're breathing. And if you think back to your CPR instruction as well, the look, listen, and feel for breathing. And give it a few seconds to see if they have respirations. If they are not breathing, then we will do a quick reposition of their airway. And from looking at your guys' slides from before, it sounds to me as if you were trained on the head tilt chin lift, if that sounds familiar to you, to reposition and open an airway.
Yeah.
So one hand on the forehead to press the head back, and then fingers underneath the jaw to thrust the jaw forward. Once you reopen that airway, if they are breathing, at that point, they become a red patient. If you've had to open their airway to get breathing to be spontaneous on their part, they become a red patient. If they are still not breathing after that one attempt at reopening the airway, then that person is labeled as a black or expectant patient, and then we move on. And when we're talking about saving time, I want you to think, we do give it that one attempt, and it's going to be difficult if someone's not breathing to leave their side and go to the next person. But again, if we're thinking back through doing the most good for the most people, we need to move on and rapidly assess who can be saved as quickly as possible. So again, reopen the airway once. If they're still not breathing, label them as an expectant or potentially already deceased patient, and we move on to the next. In a pediatric scenario, it's a little bit different if you are trained at doing it, and also if you're comfortable doing it, because some people, they may not be comfortable doing mouth to mouth, or if they don't have the right equipment or something like that. In a pediatric patient, we can give them 2 breaths if they're not breathing after we've reopened that airway, and to see if that can initiate breathing on their own and before we move on. And typically we define a pediatric as roughly, it can be tough to define, but 6 years and older is typically where we'll cut that line if we're talking as it relates to the CERT triage system. And obviously you would probably have an idea of what kind of patient base you're dealing with, depending on the disaster. If it's a bus crash of a school bus, you're likely to deal with more pediatrics, for example, than adults. So once we get past the breathing component, we've opened the airway. We've either labeled them red or black. Typically, if we've had to open the airway and we either get breathing or we don't, then we move on to assessing their breathing rate. So this is where you do the 30, I believe the 30 and 2 can do, right? So we are going to count their respirations, and anybody who's breathing faster than 30 times a minute becomes a red patient. And the easiest way to do that would be to just count for 15 seconds and multiply by 4. Just count a rate at 15, and then at 15 seconds, multiply by 4, and then there's your 30 per minute or less. In a situation, this can get tricky too, because people might be mentally overwhelmed and hyperventilating. It may not necessarily be an airway problem, but they are mentally kind of reach their max. But again, just stick to the 30. If it's less than that, then we move down the line. If it's over that, we label them red and we move on. Once we've counted their respirations, this is where we get to the 2 category. And there's 2 ways of assessing their circulatory system. We can assess for a pulse, which in this case, we try to do the radial pulse down in the wrist, because that's our best indicator of adequate circulation through the periphery, the distal parts of the body. So assess for a pulse there, or you can assess what we call their capillary refill. And on an adult, the easiest way to do this would be to take a finger and pinch, and then assess to see how long it takes for color to return to the skin. And our number there, our big defining marker there is 2 seconds. So if it takes longer than 2 seconds, then they're a red patient, because we are concerned about circulatory compromise, which in turn leads to shock. If it's less than 2 seconds, and or if you have a good strong radial pulse, then we continue down the flow chart. Then we get to their ability to mentate, to be focused. So give them some basic commands and see if they're able to follow that, where they're able to track with you on what you're trying to talk to them about. And just use your judgment. You know, it's not rocket science. It's just determining whether or not somebody's, you know, engaged in the moment with you. If they are able to follow those commands, they are labeled a yellow patient, because again, if they had been a green patient, they would have been able to answer the command and get up to walk to a designated area previously. So those are our yellow patients. If they're unable to follow commands and they're clearly confused, then they are labeled red. And so to kind of correlate it with what we're doing, this is the same system that we use at the fire department. It's the same system that we use countywide with the other EMS agencies. And it's the most commonly used system in the United States for rapid triage. So what you guys are being asked to assess is not altogether different than what we're doing either.
Tim, I actually
Yeah.
did get a question.
Yes, yeah.
Going back to the pediatric step. Does
Yes.
Kat asks if you would recommend a mouth sweep before the 2 breaths for pediatric?
Yeah, you know, again, the big thing is we're minimizing time. So that, you know, they talk about the really from person to person, we're trying to stick to 30 to 60 seconds, right, for this assessment. So yeah, I don't see a problem with a mouth sweep. There's, you know, sometimes a mouth sweep can be a little bit tricky because it depends on what is blocking their airway. If we're talking about fluid or blood, that's one thing. If they have facial trauma, for example, and we're talking about dislodged teeth, bone fragments, whatever it may be, an airway sweep can sometimes make that airway compromise worse by further clogging the trachea. So it's same concept as if you can't readily, like, and I'll correlate this with, you know, when we talk about CPR on a choking victim, right? If you can't easily see what's obstructing their airway, then you don't necessarily want to push it further down. So I would, if I was thinking about that on a pediatric, and, you know, if I'm looking at them and they look like they could benefit from that, and they, you know, clearly aren't already deceased from some other obvious factor, you know, then I would visualize the airway first before I just started blindly sweeping with my finger. If there's something that looks like it's clearly obstructing it and I can access it easily, then certainly. Does that answer the question?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, yeah. So yeah, again, just to kind of, well, like I was saying, it's the system that we're using as well. The only difference for us is that we do have some things that we do as a very rapid form of treatment in that triage phase that certainly you guys wouldn't be asked to do. But aside from that, there is no difference as far as what this system uses to determine, you know, green, yellow, red, black. So it's the same parameters for us as well. So I know that on your flow sheet as well, it talks a little bit about secondary triage. And again, that's going to be a step that's completed once you've identified and sorted all of your victims initially in that rapid triage phase. And sometimes the secondary triage actually occurs in the treatment area. So depending on if there's other environmental hazards where we need to extricate victims rapidly, you know, things like chemicals and gas and stuff like that, where the treatment area needs to be somewhere that's safer. Some of this secondary stuff happens there, but I can certainly see a situation where, depending on the level of our CERT response, Some of you may be in helping facilitate that treatment area, whether it's helping with supplies with our medical personnel, or helping just tend to victims, whether it's, within your training or just to be helping facilitate as a, support. And that's when we get into what we talk about with the head to toe survey. And Paul, certainly if I'm digressing beyond where you wanted to keep tonight's things, just let me know.
No, that's great. I was just trying to come up with a slide for you. I don't really have one, except I do have
okay.
the.
I had only seen it on that at the end of that flow sheet that I'd received in that PDF.
Right.
And so
I
Go
do
ahead.
have the patient exam card, which is sort of a part of triage and also a little bit more of a second step. Like we've
certainly,
got
yeah.
some
And
places.
this is actually a good example here. It's something that you wouldn't really see this kind of a card in that rapid triage phase. You'd see this more in that treatment area where you're now identifying their vital signs based on numbers, right? Like initially when you're counting respiratory rate, it's over 30. You don't really care about the actual number itself. You just know that it's either above or below that benchmark. And so what we're looking for in our head to toe survey is we need to expose injuries, cut clothing away, and identify what might be creating, their medical needs at that time. And I know that you guys are have you guys reviewed I see that you're given the standard vital signs for adults and pediatrics and whatnot, as far as pulse ranges and things like that. Is that something that is familiar to you, or you recall? I wonder if this might also have been something Chris added at the end, but it's not part of the start thing. So I can leave that be for now.
Okay.
But ultimately what I want you guys to take away is to keep this simple. And like I said, hopefully we don't encounter a situation like this, but when you're there and faced with the chaos of the scene, and I told you inevitably it will be for us as well. You just manage the chaos by sticking to what you know, keeping it simple, and keeping the attitude that you're going to do the most good for the most people. Does anybody have questions on the flow sheet? I went through it somewhat quickly.
Yeah, I've got a couple of questions in chat. Which Daniel, you want to just go ahead and ask your question verbally, if you want to unmute, or
sorry, yeah, I was looking at the other flow sheet. My question is: have you ever experienced someone who's actually in shock, who is at least initially or temporarily able to respond to the walk over here command? Or perhaps someone who is approaching shock and still able to perform?
Yeah, that's a good question. So the first part of that, I would say no. Once someone's progressed to that phase of the medical shock, where we're talking about an issue of their circulation and ability to deliver blood to their vital organs. Once they progress to that phase, it gets pretty obvious. They are either extremely confused, they may not even be fully conscious or conscious at all, and their look, and it might be like, well, what does that mean? Like as far as their skin is just terribly pale, and then where we see it on my end is it manifests in at really abnormal vital signs, very severe low blood pressure, very rapid pulse rate. So no, I would say that it would be incredibly unlikely for someone who is either in medical shock or on that precipice of it to be able to follow the command to get up and walk without difficulty to you. Yeah, that would be, and I've never personally, once someone's in shock, it's they have a difficult time regulating their own needs without intervention, if that makes sense.
Sure. Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, Dana, did you have a follow-up question? You had bleeding.
Well, I'm getting confused, I think, between the Knowles training and the CERT training is where do we assess the bleeding?
Okay. So I know that, and it's in, I think it's in that other slideshow as well. There it talks about the different types of bleeding, where we're talking arterial, venous, or capillary bleeding. Arterial bleeding is going to be quite obvious.
Yeah.
You know, it's the spurting type, right? And so patients who have that don't have a lot of time. So when we're talking about, and I'm assuming you're differentiating between when do we intervene with bleeding control?
Where
kind of a thing
does it
versus-
come into the triage? And I'm thinking if it's arterial, it's the first thing, because obviously if they're spurting
Right,
blood all over,
right.
we need to do that first
Right.
before we do the airway. Yeah.
Yeah, so it can get somewhat convoluted, right? Pretty quickly. So arterial bleeding is also going to be, and it may not even be something you see, especially if they're clothed, right? So if you're assessing for pulse or capillary refill with arterial bleeding, you're not going to hit those benchmarks for the 2 seconds or the distal pulse, right? So that patient would be labeled red, and we would move to the next patient because so let me think on that real quick, because I'm not terribly familiar with the other training that you guys did for bleeding control.
It doesn't matter.
Is
I
that
just
in an
was-
isolated patient?
I just wanted to make
Yeah.
sure, because we know it's the ABCs and where does
Right.
the bleeding fit in?
So the difficult thing is that in this case, you don't, what I don't want to happen is to tell you, yeah, you need to manage that person's bleeding right there at the expense of assessing the needs of X amount of other people.
Okay.
Right. So in that case, that person would be labeled red. If it's something that you can stop or at least try to mitigate with, I'm assuming that, because I was looking at your guys' slides from before, where we talked about pressure points, like direct pressure to
Yeah.
stop bleeding. And it's also dependent on what you carry in your kits. As far as, so just as a case in point, and I did bring one in, when I'm doing rapid start triage on an MCI, I have a belt kit here, but we have things that clotting mechanisms that we use and tourniquets that you guys don't typically have access to. So I would say if you can stop the bleeding with one quick attempt, and again, just keep that 30 to 60 seconds barometer in your mind, right?
Yeah.
If you can mitigate that bleeding significantly with one attempt, then, identify that this patient needs to be extricated. If there's fire department personnel on scene, or you have multiple CERT people, but then don't delay getting to the other patients beyond the time you devote to that first one.
Yeah, Tim, that's what I see as the important takeaway for me, is that if I'm having to do a direct pressure and stand there or put on a tourniquet or something, then I'm not able to help the other people.
And I don't want, and this is where it gets really hard, because it's going to pull at your, it's going to pull at the strings to move on. And so, with that answer being as vague as it was, I'll talk to Chris and just see what the expectations are for you guys within your role, and see if I can get you a better answer.
Thank you.
Does that work? Okay. I apologize for the.
No, you're doing great. And this has been it's a wonderful review. Thank you.
Okay, yeah, and I don't, like I said, I don't want things to start getting people tunneled down rabbit trails at the expense of and that's why it's kind of one of those buzzword type of things to say, about doing the most good for the most people. But that's what it comes down to, because, we're going to have limited resources. There's only so much we can do individually. So we try to maximize what we can provide as benefit to the public. And that's the attitude we carry at the fire department as well. So.
Right. Yeah.
I'll try to get you a little better answer on, just
Okay.
when that trigger point is, right, to move on.
Yeah. Thank you.
Steve's got his hand up.
Yeah.
I was sort of thinking that might be a perfect place. You have all these green people who are ambulatory, and just grab one of them and have them, hey, hold the pressure point here, and then you can move on.
And that's actually a great point, Steve. And you can, it certainly is within your capability to be like, anybody willing and capable to help, please do so. And, it's, you guys are familiar with, how to apply direct pressure, and, I imagine you guys have also reviewed, pressure points and things like that, like, the brachial artery, where that's at, femoral artery, that kind of stuff, popliteal artery in the leg. Say, hey, here, hold this spot. They don't have to know anything about medical training. And if they're willing to do that, then yeah, utilize the people that are capable and willing to help. So that's a good point.
All right. Okay.
Any other questions? Kind of a down and dirty. I apologize. It's kind of a rapid review there. But really, I can't emphasize it enough to keep it simple, because the scene and the situation are going to try to overwhelm quickly. So just keep to what you're trained to do, and do that to the best of your ability, and that's all that can be asked.
All right.
So
Thank you very much, Jim. That was terrific.
Any other questions? And this is something that's, it's this triage system has been something that has, over the last, I'd say, decade, maybe 15 years, they've really tried to streamline things on a national level. But we do a lot of review on past incidents across the nation. And each time it comes up, the big thing is that, the responders talk about how chaotic it is, and things will want to break down. So just stick to what you know. Okay. And just as long as you're operating with good intent, then that's what we're there for.
Cool.
So.
Okay.
Anything else, Paul, you need out of me?
Yeah,
for
that
this
was terrific. That was
or-
exactly what I was hoping we'd have here,
Okay.
a good review of that, and that was
Okay.
very helpful for me.
And Dana, I'll try to get a little more clarification on that breakdown for you, so that I don't give you such a like, oh gosh, when do I move on type answer, so, and it can be tough. So I'll talk to
Great.
Chris.
Okay.
Okay.
Thanks. So
right.
I'll now introduce. Thank you very much, Tim. That was
Yep.
terrific.
You're welcome. Thank you
I
all
see-
for your help.
You're welcome. Thank you. Yay. I'll now introduce myself for the next presentation, which for the next 25 or 30 minutes, I'm going to talk to you about CERT mobilization. So I'm going to just jump right into that. Everybody hydrate. That's what I'm doing. Okay. And I put this together so we'd have something to talk about and have a little better awareness of how we mobilize, and also to introduce a little bit more than we may have shown you before about the activation system that we currently have in place and how that works. And although it is true that we're looking to find a couple of type 1 duty officers to augment Dan and myself, it's also helpful to know, I think, as a responding member, what's going on at the fire station when we're doing this activation, so you kind of know what to expect. This is directly copied from the standing mobilization instruction sheet, which we all have. It's part of the CERT guidebook. It's giving the reason first, which is always good. Like, we're here to reduce the likelihood of injury while increasing our effectiveness as responders. So our first mission is always to protect ourselves first before the rest of the mission. So what's step 1 is to get the information you need if there is a mobilization. There will be a short alert that might come by email, text, or phone, depending on what buttons we push in Nixle and what's working. There's a web page. This is not in the standing mobilization instruction sheet, but this is a web page that Dan and I, as non-city employees, can actually update and put all the information about an activation in, as you'll see in a moment. So there'll be that. We also have the hotline, which is a recording, which we can put the idea there is to put some information in, and in one way or another, through one of those methods, hopefully you can get the information as to what we're doing, where it's happening, when you're expected, and what the point is. So step 2 in the mobilization, now that you've got some information about mobilization, is to secure your home. And because that's your first priority, and you're not going to be able to do much as a responder if your family is not okay. So absolutely, I added in here that you might have a family emergency plan, and if there's an emergency that has required a giant CERT mobilization, maybe this is the time for your family to do that plan. So have some communications plans, make sure everybody's okay there, and if that's fine, if you're secure at home, you're going to need some stuff. So we always have the CERT ID helmet and vest. I added N95 masks here because that's not just a COVID thing, that's a medical thing, and it's a smoke thing. So N95 masks I think should be in our kits at this point. Communications, radio, phone, and food for yourself. Maybe you're going to be, called to be out somewhere for 24 hours if things are really dire. So that's your equipment checklist and your mobilization instructions. We also say that, we require long pants, long sleeve shirts, closed shoes, and I would say you want to assess yourself too. Are you in a mental and physical space to be able to help other people? We not always are, so check that too. You'll want to bring your CERT pack, which has way more than we say in the mobilization instructions, but if you check the guidebook, you can see lots of information about the CERT packs of medium to giant sizes, and these are some of the things that I think are essential, and that also I think the mobilization instructions do, so it's not what I think. In the case of specific activities, the mobilization instructions say, if we're going to do a search and rescue operation, bring your two-way radio and GPS if you have them. Light sources, whistles are essential for searches, and a few other obvious items there. Emergency shelter operation, be prepared to sleep and hang out. Sandbag filling, you'll probably be doing that in the rain, so be prepared for that. And you'll be using a shovel, so get those work gloves on. So what's the next step? When you've got your stuff, you know where you're going, is on the way to the CERT activation. If this is a large-scale emergency, such as Cascadia earthquake sort of thing, or possibly floods, you would do a neighborhood damage assessment would be our standard procedure. So what homes have moderate or major damage, and if you've got the damage assessment form in your pack, you can fill that out. It makes it easier on the team when you get to the command post. And the mobilization instructions allow you to prioritize immediate need around you. In other words, if you're feeling that you need to, provide some first aid where you stand, or disaster medical where you stand because, people have fallen down next door, then that's your priority. We're not, no one's asking you to bypass people in need. So you report to the staging area. At this point, you have on your helmet, vest, and CERT ID. We always sign in first. That's first. Sign in is first. And then you may have to wait. So as the mobilization instructions point out, this is a good time to check your equipment, test your radio, and maybe do some just-in-time training. Here's some audience participation. Who can suggest some just-in-time training you might do while waiting to be activated while you're in the staging area with other CERT members? Anybody? Just
Practicing radio skills.
Radio skills, good.
Talking through the triage.
Looking through the triage. Daniel? She took yours. I know how it is. Anybody else? See if I can think of one.
I've got another.
Yes.
Talking about how to move stuff off of people or carry people.
Carries, exactly. So just-in-time training, there's a lot that can be done there. So you're not just sitting around, and it might be a while before the team, which might be your follow volunteers, has assembled, given themselves roles, assess the situation, and come up with a safe plan to deal with it. The mobilization instructions also say, do not go out on your own. Even if you're wearing a CERT vest, you're not CERT unless you are actually on the CERT team following CERT directions and the directions of professional emergency responders wherever you encounter them. So that's the standing mobilization instructions. Any questions about that? Should be fairly familiar stuff. Okay, good. Well, I thought it's interesting. Going through this and turning into slides made me realize it could use some updating. So maybe the leadership committee can take a look at that at some point. And there is a number of redundant things in there too that I thought could be tidied up. Okay, now here's the secret sauce part, which is activation. I'm going to talk about. So a few years ago, I updated some of our information we had in light of the fact that we had volunteer duty officers, and in trying to come up with activation that was effective and efficient for you folks. And here's what we have as an active system, which I have used a couple of times. What are our goals of activating the CERT? Well, we need to be efficient and clear, like I said. You need to have, every member needs to have enough information to decide whether they're responding. And that's not obvious what that is necessarily. They need to be ready and equipped when they get there for the equipment they're supposed to bring. And it's nice, although we don't always manage this, to know how many people are going to show up. So our activation system includes a system for RSVP. In general, what we do is get and post details on the web, and that, yes, that's one step, and I'll explain why. We record details in the hotline, although we don't always do that. We always get a short message out on Nixle, because that's our most effective communication system. And then we collect RSVPs via a little telephone system we've got set up. And there's the cat. So there's two things that Dan and I don't do, which is we don't update the CERT main webpage because it's a city login, and also AM 1700 requires staff people. Okay, give me 15 seconds and talk amongst yourselves. I'll be right back.
The cat called.
I was wondering if anyone had little cards, kind of laminated cards, or knew where to get them for those kind of things that we were just getting trapped on with the triage, like going all the steps in triage.
Yes, I believe I have some in my CERT pack. It may be a laminated sheet of that form that Tim was showing. I haven't looked at it for a while, frankly.
Okay.
Were you asking about the flow chart particularly?
Yeah, and having a laminated copy of that.
Oh, that'd probably be good. Yeah. There is one thing that I think is nice to get, and you can get these online, is the I think
really
this has Triage in it.
Yeah.
Is the CERT Right in the Rain book, and let's give it a test here. It's got markings. It's got stuff. I hope the person doesn't have an arterial bleed. They're not going to make it. It takes me this long to get to it. Yeah. There we go. Page 7. I skipped right past it.
Where'd you get that, Paul?
I think I ordered it on Amazon, actually. So this doesn't use actually it gives more context, which is helpful. But it does give a procedures, like starting asking if the person can respond, has a neat picture of the obstructed airway concept, and talks about controlling bleeding. So it's a little detailed, but it's a nice little version of the information. I'd probably be more likely to look at it during that just-in-time training. And did I mention that the flowchart, at least it's not laminated, of course, but at least I get you a PDF there that was with the meeting announcement. Okay, moving on. So I mentioned this web address, members.nationalcert.org/go. it is a web page that can be edited right from the front end as you're looking at the page. If you're signed in and you have permission to edit pages, which is a system that I set up. So, and you may have been to this site for this. We keep the calendar there. We have downloads and other things there. But if you've logged in, you get a gear button and you click edit, and then you're at the template, which I'll show you. So this is the template. And I see at the bottom here, it's got status. So the first one we put is, CERT activation. And then you have to start filling in things that you need to know. When is it? What in general are we doing? And when is not an obvious thing. Like when does, how much time in the future is reasonable to give people time to get there, but soon enough to get the job done that we need to get done. So picking an optimum time is tricky. We may or may not be working for the fire department, so it might be Jackson County Search and Rescue might be another agency. So who we're working for, what is the staging area address, and who are we reporting to? And so I like to pull up this form on whatever I've got in front of me and then start asking questions of the battalion chief going, hey, how long do we expect to be here? Or, are we running our own show or is somebody else running the show? That's where the models come in. And are we going to be inside? Or what's the conditions there? Got a little weather report link, just handy, that's live, so you don't have to do anything there. And who is being called out exactly? Is it everybody in Ashland CERT? Is it the radio people? Is it the only one base because we want to just get a few people to something? And then the other part of that form is what equipment are we requiring. If we're requiring anything special they should bring, and whether or not we're updating the recording. So just to go back through that, it's literally a page you can just type into, even though it's a web page, if you're signed in and permitted. And once you fill in these things, you've got all the information that anyone could need to do an activation. I think that one of the things that's not quite, it's the duration, right? So if we have the stop time, that's very important too. Another thing, the only other thing that might be missing here is like, is there a second shift? Are we asking for additional people, additional time? That's something you might have to add to it, or maybe you're going to announce that later. All right, so I get all the information. This tells me that I've gotten all the information I need to do the activation. I know when it is and everything else. We hit the save button down at the bottom here. And that is on the air. Nothing else needs to happen. Anybody can go to that page and see it. If we follow our standard procedure, someone we'd call in the hotline, type in the code, and record some information. We have a template for that. It's in our pack for the activators, the duty officers, which is, this is a template. This is an attempt to be complete, but remember, this is a recording, so you're not necessarily having to listen to the whole thing, but it's complete to give you enough information to activate without having to get to the web or an email or anything else. That's our template, and down at the bottom here, it's got this weird phone number. That's a Google Voice number that I set up. If you leave a message there or you send a text there, it gets emailed to the CERT duty officers instantly. And that's our RSVP system. So all you have to do is type your name in, text your name to that if you're coming, and then we can look down our emails and go, okay, these 10 people are coming. And if you leave a voice message, the voice messages are not easy to pick up because for various reasons, but if you're slow and clear with your name, Google's very good about turning into text, and we get the text. Nixle. So Nixle is our big activation system, as you know, and this is the one that gives me the ability to send everybody that's active an email. And the same system is used by just checking another box to send a text message and either a voice recording that you can make on the web or text to a voice computer message, although I prefer the recording because computer voices are, for one thing, they don't know which syllables to emphasize. So this is the text message format. And this is really short because it's got to be. we picked out some one of these types. These are all of our possible missions, which are probably too many now, but these are our missions that we were thinking of at the time. So you put in one of these mission types, you say CERT activation, you say what time the command post is opening, and you say where it is. And then you link to the web page because that's got more information for people, and give the phone number of where to RSVP if we're doing that. Once that's typed in, it's just a matter of seconds to hit a button, and it goes out to everybody's phones. And we have a choice of 3 levels. The top level, the emergency level, is really obnoxious and rings all your devices at once, and the low level is a little nicer and not as annoying. So we can sort of try to save the big level for top emergencies. Nixle can, as I said, also do an email and web message. It's all at the same time. So we pretty much, this is just a substitute in case you didn't get the text message. Same format. And so we have Nixle has a place where we upload names and phone numbers and addresses of the CERT members. So it's not part of this public Nixle system where you type your zip code into Nixle or any of that. It's not the public system at all. It's our own system, even though it's still called Nixle. And the if you change your phone number or email, and currently, if you don't tell me, then Nixle won't get updated. I'm updating Nixle, and I'm keeping track of that for eventual the CERT manager to eventually update the CERT database. And our backup system is the phone tree. It still exists, although, well, might be a year old right now. So I don't have all, and there's might be 1 or 2 phone numbers wrong in there, but it's generally there. You should have the phone tree for your base. If you don't, you can download it from the main CERT webpage, the city webpage, with a password. And if you don't know what the password is, you can ask me. So please do have that, and we'll keep that as our backup system. Let's see. Mentioned that already. Like I said, the CERT homepage is a city website, so we don't have, Dan and I don't have access to that as the duty officers, but we could ask the fire personnel to update that. But it's a lot easier for us to get to the other page and put everything in there. And AM 1700, as you know, is a public system, so we probably wouldn't use that for CERT activation unless there were no other way to contact you. But it is a possibility, and so if the lights all go out and cell phones all turn off and the internet is all gone, we've got AM 1700. Ariane, did you have a question? You can unmute if you do. No.
Sorry. Yes, I've changed my home phone. Well, the Ashland HomeNet changed my home phone without explaining. I don't know why. But so for Nixle, what do I do? And I have a new cell phone number.
Email them to me, and I will update Nixle.
Okay. Thank you.
All right. That is the activation system. Hopefully it makes sense and it's not too complicated and gives you an idea of why, if you get activated, why you're getting what you're getting. Any questions or comments about that? Dan? No, I'm kidding. Any questions or comments? Let's see. You can just shout out.
It's Dana. I'm realizing that I would have to go dig and look in papers to know what website to look at or the phone number or who to text. So I'm thinking of just making a note in my notes app on my phone, so I have all that right there.
Good idea.
Just a thought.
I'm not sure what you mean. If you get an activation, you'll get the information you need in the activation. Like it'll give you the web page.
So I wouldn't need to know members.ashlandcert.org/go, and I wouldn't need to know the 541-708-1123. It would all be provided to us.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. You just saved me from creating it.
I invite you though to take a look and see what the web page looks like, just for your edification. But since it is there in that non-active state, but no, you don't have to know it. Members.ashlandcert.org is nice to know, and I'll talk about that during announcements.
Thanks.
Other questions? Doug?
Yes. Can you hear me?
Tabitha, go ahead.
That's awesome. That template for the voicemail message, I think it was a couple pages back in your PowerPoint.
Mm-hmm.
I remember getting that a couple years ago when we were spontaneously, without any preconceived warning, given this. And the thing that I focused on was the sentence, CERT members who received an activation message are asked to sign in, ... Because I had not received an activation message prior to this thing, I didn't do jack. So
That's interesting. Yeah. Yeah, that might not be the best wording there. I'll give that some thought. I know that this came up in, we've had in the past had times when like we didn't want 50 people, we wanted 10. I'm talking like 15 years ago. And so we'd say, well, we'll only activate certain people, but then anybody can call the hotline. So, and maybe you did the right thing. That might have been one of those cases, but yeah, that wording wouldn't be appropriate if this was the only activation. That's true.
Yeah.
Okay. Good point.
thanks.
What else? Okay. I will put in the plug again. We could use a couple more people, although we'll probably be picky, but there's opportunity to become a high-level CERT person who's able to activate CERT with the authorization of the fire department, obviously. Okay, let me skip forward then. I do have one bit more here since we have a few more minutes, and then we'll get to Chris. The on-scene, people have asked me this in the past, have felt they didn't really feel like they knew what to do when they get there. So I just did a couple of slides about this, which is the first person if there's not a organized activation, which if this is the earth shakes and you've spontaneously gone to your base, then the first person on scene is a team leader. And always think about sign in first, because that's the first thing we do. And CERT member safety is our top priority, which sign in is part of. Remember our motto, which I love that Tim brought that up spontaneously at the beginning of his talk. So doing the most good for the most people. And remember our size up. That's our key to both being safe and being effective. And I want to remind you that in the CERT manual, we have checklists for every position, from including the ICTL or team leader checklist that we've developed specifically for CERT to give you an idea of what needs to get covered in order to do the most good for the most people. So grab your checklist if you've got one, or have that in your pack, and when you go, I don't know what to do next, hopefully the checklist will tell you. That is it for this little presentation. I thank you for listening. Are there any other questions or comments on activation and getting to the base? John.
Actually, that was the applause symbol. I wasn't asking a question.
Oh, well, thanks. I should know. Well, it was yellow, and I saw something there. Good. Thanks. Appreciate it.
I do have a question. I'm sorry.
Okay.
Paul. A little bit confusing is that we shouldn't do anything until we reach where we're told to reach, but on the way, if we see neighbors in distress, we should stop and help. So it's a little bit confusing.
All right, I see what you're saying there. I don't want to. I think both of those messages apply in different situations. If there's a large-scale disaster and Cascadia has happened and all the brick buildings have fallen down, then there's not going to be an opportunity for the fire department to sit down and give us a lot of instructions, and we may have to take some initiative there. On the other hand, the place where the don't be a CERT team applies is, if you see on the scanner that there was an accident down the street, that doesn't mean you put on your CERT vest and go to it, or a medical thing. We don't get involved until we're asked. I think that's the intent of those two statements, although I understand that there may be some ambiguity there, and that'd be a good test question for the prospective CERT managers.
Oh, thanks. What you answered does clear things up. Absolutely. Yeah.
Oh, great. Thanks.
Thank you.
As I understand things, I'm probably not perfect on that, and of course I'm not the policy person. So, speaking of policy, I'd like to invite Chris Chambers to give us an update on how things are going, if he's in, on how things are going with at Ashland Fire and Rescue and our search for new person and so forth.
Good evening, everyone. Is my audio coming through fine?
Excellent.
Yes.
Great. So good to be here. Always inspiring to see CERT members out in force, doing training and engaged. You guys are awesome. Thank you. So I'm going to cover a few things from the higher level here, and what's happening since Paul mentioned it. I'll start with the hiring process for the new position that will be the I've been saying liaison to CERT, so I'll stick with that. The liaison to CERT. So the position again is going to be called a fire and life safety specialist. So it's maybe something you're not used to hearing, but don't get hung up on what the name of it is. There's still the same amount of time, a half-time position that will be available for CERT coordination, trainings, resource ordering, all the stuff that needs to happen to keep the program healthy. Unfortunately, it will not evolve unless there's some sea change in the city's budget outlook. It will not evolve back into a full-time position anytime soon, as far as I know. So I don't want to make any promises. But that also creates an opportunity for looking for grant funding, which CERT has had in the past through various assistant CERT coordinators that have been acquired through grants and other means. So there may be an opportunity there to augment some of the capacity if we can find somebody to assist this fire and life safety specialist, the liaison position. The progress report on that is the job description is approved by the city manager, which is one big step. And because the position will also be a firefighter, they will have to be, that will have to be okay through the Firefighters Association. So they are reviewing the job description to make sure it fits into their classifications, and which it should. And then we will be ready to go to put it out for hire. So I'm expecting that to happen within a month to a month and a half, where it hits the streets at the longest, I hope. And then we would have it out there for maybe 3 weeks to 4 weeks to collect applications, and then a process of evaluating all of the applications and interviews, which I did confirm with Chief Sartain that we can have CERT leadership represented on an interview panel to pick the job to the best applicant. So CERT will have a say in who the person is that ends up working with you all and me too. So it's an important position in our department. We're excited to have that person coming on board. Any questions about the hiring process? I will let you know next time I know something, especially when the job description hits the street. A quick update, there was a grant that Terry had applied for and received through the state, and some of the money in the grant was spent. I have to dig into some old records, but I assume the supplies that were bought for CERT bases came out of this grant. A lot of you perhaps came and helped distribute those out to the bases. Much thanks for the help. And we still have $12,900 in this grant, as far as I can tell. So that it is earmarked for specific things. Terry put in this grant amendment and extension before she left. So it is kind of, and it was approved right after she left. So it's kind of set in stone as to what it goes for. Though, Paul, when you showed the CERT Write in the Rain notebooks, I thought, oh, maybe that's something that we could spend some grant money on to get out there for members. But the categories are kind of like PPE for CERT, and more base supplies, specifically medical. But I'll be reaching out to figure out maybe what the needs are and how we can best utilize that money. I forgot to look at the timeline of when we have to spend it, but I'd like to get it spent sooner than later. Another update, the leadership committee. So we're tweaking the format a little bit of the meetings. Having this all CERT member meeting every month is going to be a priority that I really want to stick with. Thank you, Paul, for organizing and jumping in on training. Really was happy to see Tim come in and teach the class, and really want more firefighters to be engaged in these trainings. Yeah, ideally we would be doing this in person, but for the foreseeable future, we'll be via Zoom. So we'll still look for engagement from our firefighter paramedic folks to help teach trainings at these CERT general meetings. And then we're gonna, the previously referred to leadership meetings, which as the couple that I experienced were kind of more like a general CERT meeting, are going to be more specific to a defined leadership committee. So folks via those last couple of meetings have applied to be on that and have been accepted. So I think we have a total of 11 members who will be the leadership committee starting out. They'll serve terms of up to 2 years on that committee, and they'll have a host of duties, including attending that fourth Wednesday meeting, which will be a specific leadership committee meeting. It won't be open to general CERT membership, though we will be happy to post the proceedings of those meetings. I'm going to start a CERT YouTube channel under this, well, it's a playlist technically, but it'll be under the City of Ashland's YouTube channel, and there'll be a CERT playlist that will have all of our meetings and any pertinent training videos or whatever you want to see on there. We can make that happen. Then people can watch on their own time and stay up to date on what's going on. But the leadership committee, one of the first jobs is undertaking revamping of the CERT strategic plan. That plan's about 5 years old, which you don't want strategic plans to get a whole lot older than 5 years. And with the transition right now, it's a really good time to look under the hood and say, okay, is CERT doing what we want it to do? Are people happy with the trainings and what missions we're being trained for? With, of course, input from the fire department as to what we want CERT to do as well. If there are specific missions that we feel are important and up and coming that haven't been addressed in previous planning documents, we'll take those up. But that process might take more than a few months, but we're not in a hurry. So I'm happy that we're going to undertake that. We're going to be talking at this month's meeting about what process we will use to revamp the CERT strategic plan. And within that process, there will be a lot of outreach to the CERT general membership. So folks who aren't on that committee, you won't be left out at all. You'll have plenty of opportunity to give input as we go along. But that will be the first order of business. And we will talk also about ongoing trainings. And also, I say that in part to poll this group and say, we had what seemed to me like a really productive meeting today. And what would you like to see? I know Paul's got ideas and others as well. What would you like to see in future general meetings like this. And I hope that these meetings and highly encourage that they always include training embedded in it. So firefighter rehab, I know was a question that just, or comment that came up from, I think Barb. Could we, get a revamp on firefighter rehab? What exactly do we do in firefighter rehab? Another great class to probably bring in a firefighter. So, and I see radio training, great, reviews of the basics, awesome. We can do all that. We should probably try to take advantage of Zoom to the extent possible. We have a lot of expertise locally that we could bring in, and we might even reach out of the area for some expertise in training, because hey, it's Zoom. We can bring people from all over the world if we could convince them to come to certain meetings, but we'll see. So that, unfortunately, we will continue in the Zoom format for, until such a time when it's deemed safe through the Oregon Health Authority and CDC and all the powers that be that would let us train in person. And probably we would maintain a Zoom option for a while, because I know not everybody is going to feel equally comfortable coming back in person, depending on your particular situation. I think it'll be a good idea to keep Zoom as an option, even as we go back into the potential for in-person meetings. That is all that I can think of that was on my list. Are there questions? I see there's one question at least.
Chief Chambers, John Francis. I noticed reading the paper the other day that there's a requirement that a fire marshal inspect all commercial buildings. I think it was every 2 years, which in Ashland seems like it would be a rather overwhelming task, probably a full-time job for one person. So just a thought that you might consider getting CERT volunteers to do some screening of those businesses to prioritize the fire marshal's reviews and or help with paperwork and so forth.
I'll bring that back to Ralph and ask him how that goes. My working knowledge of that is that it's a highly trained and skilled and certified position to do those inspections, or even there's different level of fire inspectors all the way up to a fire marshal. The basic level fire inspections that were talked about at the city council are for our businesses. We want to keep people safe when they're visiting Ashland. And they should be done every 2 years. The city council can elect to change that to longer than 2 years. But as it is right now, it is 2 years. I don't know whether or not CERT could somehow help in that process, but I'm certainly willing to ask the question and see if there's a way that CERT could be useful in that kind of mission, as it were. We can bring that kind of question back to the CERT leadership committee and say, hey, is this the kind of thing that CERT should be engaged in? It's not disaster preparedness per se. It's not like an emergency response mission. Do we want to get into more of that kind of work? If it's possible to do it with liability and all the stuff that the city has to deal with. But it's a great thought. And in fact, we just trained our first batch of wildfire safety assessors in what's called the WRAP program, Wildfire Risk Assessment Program. So I think we have 7 assessors now that are active out of the first volunteer group. And they're actually out there assessing people's homes for wildfire safety. So I know that is one place where volunteers can be plugged in, and we've navigated the liability there. I'm not sure. Again, I'll ask about the structure, commercial structures as well. Thanks for the comment.
We have 20 seconds left to keep our time agreement with you. I think, Ariane, did you have a quick question or Chris, you wanted just a final wrap?
Looks like Rachel might have a question.
So I just wanted to confirm, historically or in the past, my understanding is that any active member could sit in on those leadership meetings, but you're saying now leadership meetings are strictly only leadership?
It's up for a little bit of discussion, but I'm leaning towards that just to keep the meetings succinct and free from distraction. Not that we're trying to keep any secrets or anything like that. And they will be posted as soon as we have the video, which is almost instantly that the download happens when you do these Zoom meetings. So, you know, by the next day, anybody could watch the meeting. I don't know. That's just not set in stone. I will bring it up at the first meeting. But that's my leaning at this point, just to not have the meetings get watered down with a lot of input. Or there would have to be some kind of agreement that if you're not a current serving leadership member, that you just agree to stay muted and observing, which we do that in commission meetings, so that that can work. But we don't, I just haven't really had a discussion about the ground rules. So thanks for bringing it up. We'll get to the bottom of that in our first get together.
Okay, thank you.
All right, well, if there's nothing else in the way of questions, thank you all again. Again, always inspiring to see people showing up to help their community and be prepared when the time comes. Let's hope that you never have to do emergency medical triage, because that would be pretty hard work. I've not served much on the medical side, but I've been on some search and rescues, and just recovering bodies and all that is not any fun, but yet at the same time, a necessary evil. So thanks for putting yourselves out there and availing to the training and being ready to serve Ashland CERT and the community.
Great. Thank you. Thanks, everybody.
It's good.
Hi, everyone.
Have a good evening.
Paul, thanks very much for organizing. This was great.